really look to make everyone's life easier. I view the role of sales operations as removing boulders. Our job is to clear the path, let the salespeople go in and do what they do best. So I like to break things into two buckets, right? It's either high tech or high touch,
Mm.
right? And in most programs, processes, go to market strategies, one or the other is where you need to go. Sometimes down market, you need to be, high tech. You need to
Mm.
be able to allow teams to come in, self-serve, self-educate, self-quote, and get in, get out, get on to the next deal. Alternatively, up market, you may have a different model where you need a very high touch model. You need very integrated teams. Everyone needs to be aligned on priorities and really high levels of communication. And so at a very high level, that's my philosophy. I try and break things down into those two buckets, and really look to make everyone's life easier. Right. I view the role of sales operations as removing boulders. Right. Our job is to clear the path, let the salespeople go in and do what they do best. Right. Which is not updating CRMs, which is not booking times or taking notes or trying to work within learning management systems to get collateral to a rep, or excuse me, to a customer. So all of those things, right? I see sales operations as playing a part in helping drive that philosophy, to help people, stay in their zone of genius, or where they're most valuable to the company.
Zone of genius. I love that expression. I also love this high touch, high tech thing. So if you're designing a process, what's the key theme of what you want to achieve based on either the high touch and the high tech? Like, how do they compare, stack up? How's it going to be different?
I think initially it's the velocity, right? The
Okay.
velocity of the sales cycle, the velocity of the customer, right? If you have a customer who's in crisis, you don't have time for a 9-month sales cycle. You might need to deliver a solution instantly to that customer. And it could be a cost of goods driven need for velocity, where if we were to dedicate the same high priced salespeople into a down market or a less margin rich environment, right, that's not the best decision for the business. So there's a couple of different levers that can drive when you need to go high tech.
Mm.
I would say the last one, Tom, would be if you can, right? We certainly live in a world where if you can automate it, the teams can adopt to that automation and low touch, you're better for it.
That's interesting, Jeremy, because you said one of the reasons you might choose, the sales velocity is the need of the customer. I thought it was going to be more like market segment. Are these just quicker, more transactional deals? But it's not necessarily. It's also something you have to respond to in live real time based on how the customer's doing.
That's true. And this most recent, the past year or so has certainly brought that to light. But I don't think you're wrong though, Tom. Market
Mm.
segment definitely plays a part in it. And that, I think, to me, is part of the customer need, right? A 20-person firm is able to move very quickly and make a decision very quickly when purchasing a technology or looking at a new solution. Compare that to a 1,000-person organization, right? There's a lot more stakeholders involved and a lot more champions that you need to win over.
Mm. Interesting. Okay. So would you have reps using both a high touch and a high tech process?
In some cases,
In some cases.
I find reps more often than not early in their careers are working down market
Okay.
on
Yeah.
smaller opportunities, and
Progress.
as they grow and mature, and they can, one, it's kind of a track record, right? You don't want to hand over the crown jewel
Yeah.
accounts to a brand new rep, but I could see that being something that's driven on the skill of the rep or the coverage.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that in itself is worth talking about, right? Because then, if I understand it correctly, you have reps doing, high velocity deals, maybe high tech, lots of automated stuff. They don't have to think so much. But as they progress, suddenly things get a bit more complicated, a bit more nuanced, you might say, and they're using processes that are much less automated. And there's an interesting enablement piece there as to how you upskill and prepare them for that. And I'd love to hear about how you do it.
Absolutely. I think, Tom, it's one of the biggest challenges in
Mm,
driving change within an organization, right? Nobody likes change. There's no
yeah,
shortage of professional books on moving cheeses and all sorts of things, right? That address best practices for how to drive change. From my standpoint, right, and having implemented a number of CRMs, having built programs, on a global scale, there are some key tenets, right? And when you overlay them, you get this kind of Venn diagram of what you should be doing in my mind as to how to best adopt or bring people onto these new processes. So, I think at, at at its core, you really need to start with the end in mind. You need to understand why you're doing it, and you need to articulate that to the teams, right? They need to understand that what you're asking them to do has a benefit to them, right? So you do relate to their self-interest. You do need to relate to the overall why that the organization is asking them for this. And you pair that up with a number of other things too, where the voice of a peer is incredibly powerful, right? I find salespeople are extremely story driven.
yeah.
And so what may be uh, a very clear reason as to why we need to do something legally or strategically,
Mm.
having a peer, explain, look, I went through this, I did the training, I did this, this is going to help us all in the end, right? That validation goes a long way. And then, a couple of the other things I would say, and please jump in if you have any questions or you find I'm rambling, but
Please.
um, the audience, right? The types of learners that you're
Yeah.
teaching and what you are teaching. With everyone working from home, this past year or so, I know that I've seen my organization do a lot more recorded trainings, right? But I think uh, those are really dependent on someone. It's what you put in is what you get out of those recorded trainings. If you're completely dialed in and focused on them, they'll go well. If you're working on emails and you're trying to answer customer calls at the same time you're doing training, that may not go so well. So, some of the things that I've found is, doing recorded trainings and then following up with small team sizes for Q&A. I
Mm.
find people are much more confident to get in front of their small peers as opposed to a larger geography or a larger regional team and pose those questions. So putting people in a spot where they are comfortable feeling vulnerable helps you get them to onto the other side of that change.
I like,
In addition,
sorry, go on.
no, please, please.
No, please. Well, I just thought that vulnerability piece was really interesting, actually. Why, why,
Yeah,
why, why, why do we need people to be vulnerable? Is it so they can open up about what they find challenging? Like, what's the vulnerability in here?
I think, Tom, there's a couple things culturally. I think, and me being in the States and trying to push training out around the world, I need to be aware of my own cultural implications, the things that are in my culture that may not be represented in others, right? The ability or the comfort in asking questions, right? And that's really what I would encapsulate being vulnerable, right? Admitting you just said something, I don't understand it, right? I need you to rephrase this, restate this, because I may be coming from a different background, I may be coming from a different lexicon, and all of those things play a role. And so in certain cultures, it's not, they're not as apt to ask questions. And so, knowing that and knowing that you may not have those questions when people truly have them, right? Or you may not hear those questions from the audience that you're training. It's important to address that and just put them in a spot where they do feel comfortable. And so that might mean, creating an anonymous question line, right? And we're going to push recorded training, then we're going to source questions anonymously, and then we'll answer them in mass and create FAQ documents, right? And so there's a bit of nuance that you want to approach the training with, and it all goes back to that point of who are you training and what makes that audience who they are.
It's about checking in that our processes make sense on the ground, and the only way we can do that It's by actually getting honest feedback where people are able to fully divulge their ideas, their opinions, and how they work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Something I wanted to ask you, Jeremy, is like processes. You know that like that's how we implement stuff, right? That's how we implement the tactical at the end of the day. Not sure how much you're involved with this, but eventually, I suppose that does trickle up to the strategic. We have the idea, the strategic initiative processes. In some way, that's how we implement them. I'm really interested to hear your part in the strategy to tactical handover and how you make it make sense and how you make it work.
Absolutely. So in sales operations, I think one of the it's very easy to get sucked into the tactical,
Yeah.
right? To get focused on the, I have a request, I'm going to move the bucket, the bucket of work from this bucket to the next, right? Or I'm going to plug away at the requests from my team because I enjoy helping folks, right?
Yeah.
That to me is always the danger, right? And it's being able to step back, to detach from the current uh, storm of notifications that you may be under, right? The no shortage of email, communication platforms, your mobile, all of these things coming in and vying for your attention can take you off of that strategic goal, right? And I think there's a need for sales operations to really defend bandwidth and to bring that up when folks are asking for a process change or they're asking for tactical support, right?
Mm.
To really bring it back and to have leadership aligned on what those goals are and to be
Mm.
able to say, you know, this is a fantastic nice to have, but it's a nice to have. We have these needs that we need to go and execute on, not discounting it. Let's put it on the roadmap. Let's figure out the ROI on it, right? That to me is another missing piece when trying to, automate or move from tactical to strategic or maintain that strategic vision, right? Do we have an ROI against it, right? And are we truly working again on something that we know will drive the biggest value to the business? Because then it becomes easier, I think, for teams to push back on the tactical,
Mm.
where we can say, no, we're leaking revenue here. No, we're mishandling deal registrations. No, we're doing whatever it is, right? All of these things could play a role.
Okay. So it sounds like that feeds into your KPI and OKRs around what processes you actually divulge. Is it feeds back into that, feeds it back into the ROI?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Keeping a close eye on the metrics so that you can continue to make investments in areas that are working well and adjust if needed.
Okay, that's great. So one thing I'm super interested in is when you're talking about your priorities, how does that work? Is it the ops team is sitting amongst themselves thinking about what's working, not working in the business? I assume to an extent it's collaborative with maybe sales leaders, or does it come down from the board? Like how does this all work? How does it all fit together? Sure, it's maybe all of those things, maybe a little bit.
A little bit, right? It is certainly something that as a leader of people, I'm always sourcing my team for great ideas, right?
Mm.
It's one of the things I look for in hiring someone, right? Do you have creative new ideas that or experiences that you can bring value to the organization? So oftentimes I find the creative ideas for automation and process improvement come bottom up because of the people who are in the weeds doing the work. And then I find the go to market changes, right? And the areas where we can really grow the business through a new uh, through a new line of business, right? Coming top down. But it's the meeting of those two things, right? And it's the open communications and the clear objectives that help make that all work. I think I've seen organizations do it really well. I've seen organizations where it's a free for all and everyone gets to run their own priorities and fight for the internal resources to get those done.
Mm.
One is definitely more successful than the other.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Has to be planned and considered. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, do you have either really incredible process rollout that was really successful, or if you want to take it another way, one that maybe didn't work very well? Could you describe kind of what happened and what you learned from it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things I mentioned in terms of rolling out a process come out of a recent process change um, that was very successful,
Okay.
and it started from a failure, right? Like most things often do. We
Mm.
tried pushing pure video training, right, and relying on the fact that this drives your paycheck, so you'll pay attention.
Mm.
Not being honest with ourselves and understanding the volume and the amount of noise people had when transitions were made or business models were adjusted early. And so that I won't call it a straight up failure, but we didn't get the adoption that we were looking for, which isn't hitting the mark, however you like to spin it. But that really led us to adopt this new way of thinking, which is to be very open and transparent with what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and sourcing the challenges from the teams in advance. I feel that people just being heard, even if you don't ultimately end on their recommendations for the process, have more respect and are more bought in, right? If they feel like their voice has been heard, and we're aware of the challenges that they may be faced with what we're rolling out. So, again, learning who your audience is, understanding, what makes them tick, and making sure you have stories from their peers, and ultimately going back to the why, right? Why are we doing this? Bring them data, show them the data of their peer as to the increase in productivity, the increase in earnings that they'll achieve through these changes, right? Those things to me are all the best practices that make process adoption real.
I'm really glad you mentioned the data. How does data feed into creating your why and proving the use case, I suppose?
It takes the emotion out of it,
Mm.
right? I find salespeople are motivated by money and medals,
Mm.
and medals meaning MEDALS,
Yeah.
right? So they want their names up in lights at the top of a leaderboard,
Yeah.
or they want a really nice commission check, right? Tend to be the two things that drive salespeople. So, getting them to adopt, is it needs to appeal to those two aspects in some way, and the data takes all the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
If I can show that a process change, if we go through an extra sales step, but I'm increasing our average sale price, and I can show that across 200 transactions, right? It takes all the emotion out of it, and it helps them detach from, oh man, what you're asking me to do is more work, and they're able to actually see the other side. They can cross that chasm and say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to get the recognition I need. I'm going to be able to prove that I'm running my business appropriately, right? Whatever those aspects are. The data just, it's your armor, right? If you could think of the data as, or you're going into battle, the data is the armor that, you can't go into battle without it. Otherwise you're in a tough spot.
Cuts through the fluff, tells you what's
It
real.
does. It does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, Jeremy. Another question I'm sure you've seen from the other interviews, but it's one I always like to ask. If you're in a room of sales RevOps leaders, what would you ask them?
Uh, Good question. If I were in a room with those sales ops or rev ops leaders, it would be, it's to some of our earlier comments, how do we do more with less? Because you have
Yeah.
one team that is focused on and of the mindset of, we don't have enough people to tackle the opportunity that's in front of us.
Yeah.
No matter how, what your TAM is, what your total addressable market is, or how many sellers you have, it will never truly be enough. And you have the other side, which is, we need to stay within a cost. We need to balance our ratios. We need to make sure that we are, um, upholding our end of the bargain or our responsibility to the shareholders, if that's, or the employees. So, it's, how can we, or maybe it's even, how do we go high tech? How do we go high touch? Where can we do those things? Because salespeople are the most expensive resources, and how can we do more with less?